Welcome, everyone. My name is Dana White. Welcome to the Myth Salon. Well, if last week wasn't exciting enough for all of the films that we had, the thing that struck me most about the Oscar-winning films, and as well as all of the films that we have, was this seemed to be the year of the little. I was really struck by some of the really powerful films like Night Ride, this little tiny film from Norway, and The Ice Merchant. I mean, how do these storytellers capture such powerful film themes in 8 or 10 minutes? And then even the obvious one, the one that took everything, everywhere, everything, all at once. Here's these people running a laundromat trying to take on the IRS. I mean, it was powerful. So what I'd like to do is open tonight with a little poem by a woman named Kimberly Blazer from Wisconsin. It's called The Way We Love Something Small. The translucent claws of newborn mice, this pearl cast of color, the barely perceptible, like a ghosted threshold of being, here, not here, the single breath we hold on the thinnest verge of sight, not there, there. A curve nearly naked, an arc of almost, a wisp of becoming, a wand, tiny enough to change me. I'm not sure we really need big in a year of the small, that these small moments really, I think of Michael Gellert, The Way of the Small. God, I was blown away by his book. So with that, I'd like to take a small moment, and I'd like to welcome everyone today. Let's have a brief moment of silence before we let things begin and heat up. What an amazing panel we have with us today. And to find out who everyone is, I'm going to turn it over to my wonderful partner and friend, Will Lynn, and let's see how the afternoon shakes out. Will?
Thanks, Dana, and thank you for that poem. It's actually a really interesting concept to bring up going into tonight, because in some ways I see this as an evening with the world's biggest mythology scholars who could possibly be talking about film, the big. But what I want to do as I introduce this is point to how small that is for us, how precious and close these conversations are for those of us who are having them and who have been part of this Myth Salon. I think about how we got here to this conversation. I think about having wanted to put something like this together before all the small parts were there. I think back to a little bitty call I had with Dara Marks when I was thinking about pursuing Pacifica's Myth program and my original interest in myth and storytelling. I think of the Myth Salon in your living room with Vanessa Taylor when she was nominated for the screenplay for Shape of Water. I think of Halloween parties with the Daniels and how, believe it or not, at the time, they were trying to figure out story structure. I think about all the damage we did with the Joseph Campbell Writers Room and the Oscar event we hosted for Michael Wiese Productions. I think of the 25th anniversary event with Chris Vogler on the writer's journey, and then our event with Maria on the heroine of 1001 Faces. I think of attending the Esalen Film Festival with Corinne Bourdeau, with my friend Alexander Philippe. I think about the series we did with Dennis Slattery on myth and popular culture and poetics. I think about all the times that John Bucher has been there for me to help me as I navigate terrains of mythology and filmmaking. I think about all these many adventures with Dana and the way these voices all started really come together in our event on The Wizard of Oz earlier this year. And I think about the incredible conversations we had last month with Stephen Finley on extraterrestrials, race, Wakanda Forever, and Nope. Tonight will be a special night. I'm quite sure there's never been a cast of mythologists at this level get together to reflect on any year's biggest films. On one level, it's quite a thing that we're about to do. And on another, as we get started, I just want to love all the good times that have gotten us here. For years, we've been engaging the hard problems surrounding myth and storytelling, from the limitations of the hero's journey and the journey of heroines to the importance of responding to wars of aggression with narrative no-fly zones. So thank you all again so many times for offering your fellowship to these journeys. It's now my honor to introduce you all. Many of you know the great and legendary Chris Vogler, who's been a development executive and is author of The Writer's Journey. I think I've got a couple of these books here. The Writer's Journey, 25th Anniversary Edition. Very eager to hear your thoughts about Darren Aronofsky's film, The Whale. Maria Tatar, author of Heroine of 1001 Faces, has been a long-serving chair of Harvard's Myth and Folklore degrees, as well as Dean of the Humanities there. John Bucher is a mythologist, screenwriter, and interim director of the Joseph Campbell Foundation. He's author of numerous volumes on myth and storytelling, including Masters of the Cinematic Universe, which I wanted to call out in part because I want to thank his publisher, Michael Wiese, for sending out the invitation to this event. Michael Wiese publishes the best books out there on how to bring film to myth, from John's book to The Writer's Journey by Chris and Save the Cat. Corinne Bourdeau is director of the Esalen Film Festival and president of 360 Media, which has promoted a number of Oscar films this year, not to mention every year for the last 25. Terry Ebinger is with us for the first time tonight, is a film scholar and founder of Cinema and Psyche, which features her emphasis on a psychological and mythological approach to film studies. Dara Marks, mythologist and author of Story, Power of the Transformational Art, is recognized by Creative Screenwriting Magazine routinely as Hollywood's #1 script consultant. She's also an old friend of the Myth Salon, and it's awesome to have you here with us. Dennis Patrick Slattery is Professor Emeritus of Pacifica's PhD in Mythological Studies with an emphasis in depth psychology, poet and author of or editor of 22 books on myth and storytelling, which you can find on his website, DennisPatrickSlattery.com. I've also got to thank him publicly this time for sending me his new book, Fictions and Our Convictions. Otherwise, you know Dana White, host of the Myth Salon, contributing faculty of Pacifica's Myth degrees and author of numerous volumes on myth. I'm Will Lynn, moderator of our evening, story producer, host of a series for ZDF, Sky, and History Channel called Myths, the Greatest Mysteries of Humanity, and chair of a department where I teach myth and film. Welcome. Thank you all for being here. There are a lot of movies. We can go a lot of directions, and I hope we will go be everywhere with everything all at once. But to get started, as that movie did, I want to start in a simple, grounded, introductory place. One of the conversations that we've been having throughout the years, somewhat centered around Dara and Maria, has had to do with heroine journeys. And this year's big winner was literally a story of a heroine with 1001 faces. So I thought that maybe we could all start out talking a little bit about how the heroine and the heroine's journey has been making an impact in Hollywood lately, this year, and with that film. And to do that, I thought we would turn first to Maria. Thanks for being with us, Maria. Looking forward to your thoughts.
Will and Dana, thank you both for your expansive generosity. I'm just so excited to be here with this panel and to talk about movies and to hear everyone's thoughts. So I promise not to take up too much airtime to begin, but I do want to say a few words about Everything Everywhere All at Once, because when I saw it, I thought, oh gosh, this film is inventive, it's zany, it's entirely new, but I am completely confused by it. It breaks the mold. And what I realized is that we have a heroine who is really sui generis, an entirely new model of heroism. And there she is, Dana referred to this, she is trapped in the world of taxes and laundry, sort of how I feel every April. And the banality of her existence is, I think, brilliantly captured by the IRS office and then by her office at home. She's, surrounded by bills. There's a proliferation of bills. And so Evelyn doesn't really undertake the heroic journey, the hero's journey of times past. And she also, and this is what perplexed me, she doesn't really have any of the features of heroines from times past. So one of the things that shocked me a little bit or disappointed me at first was she's just completely resistant to things that should arouse her curiosity. She doesn't want to know. She's not caring. She's sort of, when she rushes after her daughter, there's this moment of truth there. And what does she say to her daughter? But you're getting fat. So that element of care, and she's also not crafty. She's sort of tense and robotic. So curiosity, care, and craft, those three features of heroines from times past seem to be absent. She's disconnected. She's disconnected from what matters, from Waymond and joy. I love the fact that she can't connect with joy. She lives in this joyless world. So she's living the worst version of herself. And she goes down the rabbit hole into this metaverse, and she's not brave. She's not fearless. But what does she do? Crazy things. So here's the flip side to all of that. She's a woman with a beautiful voice. She's been silenced. We also get this inventory of her professions because the IRS is keeping track of her and her Schedule C and that kind of thing. So she's a singer, a novelist, a chef, a teacher, a singing coach, and I love this, a Watsu technician. Does deep water therapy or warm water therapy. And suddenly, while we get this inventory from the IRS of all of her professions, she gets this written message: switch shoes to the wrong feet, close your eyes and imagine you're in a janitor's office. And that's when she presses the button and off we go to her adventures, and they become adventures. And I want to just close with a couple of thoughts about the ending, because to me, those moving words, I will cherish these few specks of time. I will cherish these few specks of time. So you don't have to be heroic in the traditional way that we once thought of heroes. You can embrace what you have in the here and now. So it's a kind of celebration. And I love what Dana said about smallness, a celebration of lowercase heroism, which may not be so terrible. We can do whatever we want. And I guess the real message to me, and this is what I hope we'll talk about too, is the way that in many of these films, what is socially marginalized becomes symbolically central. So suddenly they occupy, the socially marginalized, the disenfranchised, occupy center stage. We see them, we hear their voices suddenly. And I think that, we can connect here with a number of films ranging from Triangle of Sadness to Banshees of Inisherin. So I'd love to hear the thoughts of panelists about, Dara, about the arc of redemption, and the adventure, Chris, about the adventure, the call to adventure, and much else.
Thank you, Dara. You've been evoked.
Hello, everyone. Hi. Thank you, Maria. That was terrific. It really brought up a lot of things for me that I hadn't fully considered yet. And I think that's really wonderful. Dana, I just, to work my way into this, I'd like to also just add kind of a counterpoint. While I do think there's a kind of a smallness to so many of these small, wonderful stories that are just about our humanity, in terms of storytelling, they are exceedingly long. If you by comparison, I think the average movie this year somewhere in 2 hours, which is very long. And just from a more critical point of view, I felt like we were still in the throes of the artist sort of coming to terms himself with what the story was about, because could have used some good editing in there. But that aside, I think there was some absolutely wonderful material that that kind of sticks to your bones, whether, and then to me, that when art works, that's what's happening. It kind of continues to sort of live and grow inside of you a bit. And I think a lot of it did. And I think everything, let's see, I always, everything everywhere all at once definitely has that quality to it. My take with the heroine journey is a bit different, either or, but just a bit different. I tend to focus on something which I call the feminine heroic, and that's a non-gendered concept. So it isn't about female heroics, it's about our feminine inner world. And I feel like what I really liked about this film, and I'm going to be very quick here, but I'd like to also compare it quickly to Women Talking, because I think both of those films dealt with aspects of the feminine heroic that are quite worthy of our attention. For me, the part that is continuing to grow for me for Everything Everywhere All at Once is that I felt that in terms of the heroic journey, it's a return. She's trying to find her way home, back to her center, back to the place of meaning. And so on some levels, it brought up for me the descent of Inanna, and the descent as this, when we're on this homeward bound journey, what is required of us and happens to us, whether we like it or not, is a decompartmentalizing of all the things we've stowed away in life to sort of help life flow a little easier. And I'll deal with that another day kind of thing. And she had a lot of compartments that were clogging up any forward motion in her life. So I thought the metaphors in this were great with, everything's so cluttered and things aren't adding up in terms of the IRS and all of that. And it just, there's some wonderful things here, but, I agree with Maria. It was a challenging film. And is something I'd like to actually personally just dive into a little deeper, and probably will incorporate it more in some of my talks, because this idea of decompartmentalizing so that we can deal with all that hurt and pain and shame and everything that has been stowed away, stripping us bare down to our essence, and being remade again in something that's more authentically who we are, so that we can not only love, but allow love in, because her blocks were in both directions. So anyway, that's what I enjoyed about that. And I felt I just will quickly say, and hopefully we'll get to more later, Women Talking was another aspect of the feminine journey, but this is more outbound, whereas Everything Everywhere All at Once is inbound, is back to her center. These women had lived in the dream state. In fact, that was their comment, that they were dreamers. And now they are on an odyssey. They are being pushed out into the world to go and claim their lives, claim who they are, and that was also very interesting to me. So I'll just wrap it on those two things, because I thought they were very profoundly interesting. And I think some of the other movies that we'll hopefully get to also contained aspects of this inner and outer bound journeys.
Well, I'm just going to do that thing where I respond a little bit to what y'all say. I'm just going to do that thing where I respond a little bit to what the two of you say until I see somebody else's mute come off. But what I will say is that it's really, really cool to hear you make a connection to Inanna and this deconstruction journey, especially after what Maria said about how she starts out in the wrong side of the arc. She starts out needing to go through this deconstruction journey. Thank you very much. And I see Terry. Terry, welcome tonight. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Thank you. I'm so honored to be here. So one of the things that came up for me with Everything Everywhere, of course, is that it's a story about generational trauma. and the difficulty with confronting that, sticking with the process. You know, the whole thing about sticking with the process is in there. And I'm thinking, I'm about to launch a series on the heroine's journey in film next week. So all this is really on my mind. And one of the things I refer to is Marion Woodman saying that the divine feminine, the deep feminine, is process, paradox, and presence. And in the heroine tales I saw this year, the ordeal often was to be present to the process and to be able to hold paradox. So going back to Everything Everywhere, the generational trauma, somebody that spoke reminded me that it's an accounting, the whole IRS thing, it's an accounting for where she is and what she's left behind. I see it very much as a midlife tale, that in midlife, the unlived life comes to call. And if we don't tend to that, we will get abducted into the underworld with some kind of crisis. And all those metaverse options to me are parts of the unlived life, parts of the dreams that she maybe had left behind, and that long line of employments that she had. It was challenging. But, you know, I understood why it won so many awards. The last 2 years, we wanted happy endings. The world wanted movies that no matter how complicated they were, they landed in a place where it was a joyous affair. So that it was the most joyous Academy Awards I can remember in years and years. And then I want to talk about Women Talking, because for me, that was the movie of the year. And what I noticed is the kind of allegorical reflection that there it was on the list of 10. And with all the podcasts I listened to, all the articles I read, nobody talked about it. It was just somewhere in the background. And when I saw it, I felt it was profound. I had a profound response to it. And I thought of your book, Maria. The whole time I was watching the film, I thought, oh, here's that piece of the heroine's journey. Oh, here's that piece. And I feel like that movie contains our story. It's our story as women in there. And there they are, holding paradox, you know, the two opposites in the tension, holding the tension of opposites, staying present, except for the ones who left right in the beginning, and being in a process of discovery. Tend and Befriend is one of the things I'm really interested in with the heroine's journey. Shelley Taylor's study in 2000 at UCLA, the first study on female stress response ever. And that what she found is females tend to want to affiliate, and that there's an oxytocin response in that. And that when they affiliate, they're protecting the young, they're gathering to develop resources for their protection and resources for their survival. And all of that is happening in Women's Talking too. Oh, and her speech, I wanted to just say a word about her speech. She starts her speech, Polly's speech was one of the great ones of the night. She starts by saying, I want to thank the Academy for not being mortally offended by putting the words women and talking so close together. And then she said, cheers. And then she said, more or less, this is, Marion Teaves' story of a radical democracy, a group who is not in agreement, who finds a way through without violence, and not just by talking, but by listening. So even her speech just was so moving. So anyway, I really feel like that film that got a little bit of attention for me is one of the films that came out this year, made by women. The other two, The Eternal Daughter and Corsage, which I may say a few words about, made by women that for me just contain every element of the heroine's journey, particularly from the perspective of your work, Maria.
Yeah, I just, a couple of comments. I tried 3 times to get through Everything Everywhere, and I got locked in at 40 minutes. So as a viewer, I started to ask myself, what's going on in you that you're resisting continuing in this story? And then when it won, Sandy and I said, you know what, we have to watch it from beginning to end, which we did. And the normalcy at the end of it was like a breath of fresh air, fresh air. What struck me about it, a number of things, and I'm so glad that we're talking about women talking, because I've got several pages of notes that I took when we watched that. The sheer volume in our culture through social media and all of the different formats that are crying for our attention is become so overwhelming that my wife and I have pretty much stopped watching the news. We can't handle it. I feel like we're in the laundromat, or remember the staircase? I mean, you can just barely get down it because there's wash buckets and clothes and hampers, and so the metaphor of the too muchness of information really broke through in an important way for us when we got to the end. For women talking, I just want to say a couple of things. It begins, what follows is an act of female imagination. You know, with that at the beginning, Sandy and I were hooked. We knew something important was going to happen. And it happens in that barn with August, the school teacher, who's the only one who knows how to read or write. And he says, I'll be the scribe and I'll record what goes on here. And I love the comments, Terry, that you've made and the others on women talking. And they say, we have no language for our bodies. There's a gaping silence, and that's the real horror. No vocabulary. And I love that moment when August and Ona, she asks him, what is that squiggle on the page? And he says, oh, that's a comma. And you know, there's a butterfly called a comma. I mean, that was sheer magic. And to come back to Dana, in the tiny particularity, the film just gathered a symbolic field around it, around that comma. So I have other things to say, but that's plenty for a beginning. Thank you.
Thanks. And I saw Chris, and we'll all be able to get in before we kind of open it up a little bit, you know?
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah, I just have so many things bouncing around in my head off of what all these great people have brought to us on this. You know, going back to Dana's starting point with much out of little. I mean, that's a phrase from Sir Francis Drake had that as his motto, the guy who sailed around the world, and multum in parvo, that a lot comes out of a little sometimes, and out of his little ship, he was able to sail all the way around the world. So it reminded me of something that Joseph Campbell used to say about small amplifications of consciousness sometimes being as significant as the big shattering things. Just a little change of perspective. And that's one of the things I found delightful about this whole set of films that we've been looking at, is that there are so many ways to entertain, and that the films came from so many interesting different sources. Some of them, like Fabelmans, from Spielberg's own life experience, Elvis, of course, from a real person, others sort of based on other things, but some just acts of the pure imagination. And I think that's exciting, is to see that there isn't only one kind of film, you know, and this was a sort of a journalistic judgment that was being made on the film business, that, well, we've kind of given up on making art films, and now we're only making superhero special effects things. And here we had films from the complete range of shot in black and white, and almost like a stage play with women talking, to everything, everywhere, all at once, giving you a little bit of both the small and the large scale, and plenty of special effects. One thing I would chime in on what Dennis said, and I think Dara referred to this too, there is an absolute blockade
to entering into that film. I experienced it trying to watch it, not under the best conditions on a plane, admittedly, but there was a definite bar at about 10 minutes where sitting on the plane, at least, it was too much information. It was noisy and it was bombarding me. And it was to a purpose. They were trying to establish something that I think a lot of us feel in our daily lives, this feeling of being overwhelmed by trash, by by paper, by all the demands of real life. And but there is a benefit to sticking with it and getting past that bar. And I guess Dennis found another one about 40 minutes in. I found myself with the feeling I sometimes have reading scripts, where you're about halfway through and you're going, this should be over, but it's growing new pages, and it seems to be getting longer even as I work through it. So I was really astonished by how much material there is in Everything Everywhere All at Once, shot at you out of a cannon at high speed. And, you're really bombarded and quite worn out if you stick with it all the way through and don't take a break. That's quite a ritual ordeal to go through. And I think that's where I end up with some of these films. The better ones, I think, often will have a kind of a shamanic echo to them. I feel that's where we're at, the kind of shamanic territory we're in with everything, where there's travel between worlds, as the shamans do, and there's accessing to the powers that are available in these other worlds. Actually, as a science fiction buff, as a kid, once we got into the conceit of the movie and I realized that, we're in a multiverse sort of a thing, I was extremely familiar with that, and I relaxed and said, okay, now I see what's going on. They built this fantastically detailed, complex real world, and now they're going to have fun with all of the science fiction and almost in the territory of Philip K. Dick, who wrote science fiction stories that had an intense psychological dimension to them, as well as being, very entertaining and full of bizarre, unusual events. So I thought another sort of shamanic thing built into it was the fact that in order to travel to these different worlds and access different possibilities for themselves, they had to break taboos. And that seems to be a shamanic concept as well, that you live at the edge. And in order to access those powers, sometimes you have to break the taboos of the tribe that are like, this is for normal people. This is how normal people behave. And only the special folks who are chosen can break those taboos. But with that breaking of taboos comes a lot of power. So I thought that it was interesting, as Maria said, that she's living in the main world, the mainstream world we're talking about, in the worst of all the possible worlds. But I think by the end of it, she realizes that it was actually the best of them all, because that's the one where she had love and these sparks, these little specks of time, and that it was all worth it for those moments. So I enjoyed that, and I had an interesting experience. I watched the film almost all the way through and then set aside just the last few minutes of it. And I happened to come back and watch a scene again, which I'd already seen. And the first time I saw it, it didn't move me at all. And the second time it made me cry. And it was the scene where we're on a staircase and the daughter who's this god of this insane universe, is trying to draw us to destruction in the giant bagel, the everything bagel. And the shot is just the mother pulling her back, and then the father, the grandfather, pulling her back, and then the husband is holding him. So all three of the generations are visually linked. And like I said, the first time through, it's interesting how sometimes things hit you and sometimes they don't land. But the second time around, for some reason, that one slew me and gave me the full catharsis. I mean, I got the whole movie in that one scene. And then I'll just end with a little more general observation about the word catharsis. There was a lot of vomiting in this year's films. You know, I don't even remember what the context was now in everything, but there was such a scene. There certainly was a lot of it in Triangle of Sadness. It's in Tar, you know, and if I kept looking, I think I might find
The Whale.
It's certainly in The Whale, yes. So, you know, when something is so strong, when a motif is so strong, you have to ask yourself why that is. Now, I used to run into this reading scripts all the time, and I would see, like, out of 10 scripts, 7 of them would have scenes of people throwing up. And, you know, it has something to do with the word itself, catharsis, which literally means vomiting or purging, getting rid of toxins. And I think that maybe we're seeing a little concentration of it because we're all being asked to digest the indigestible and to live with stuff that human beings know that there's something wrong. As animals, we sense that there's something wrong, and we're having trouble stomaching that. And I think that it came out as a motif, maybe not the prettiest one, but it is interesting how persistent that theme is.
Yeah, John, please jump in.
Thanks. Well, it's a real delight to be with all of you tonight. A lot of old friends. Good to see Chris and Dara and Dennis and Corinne, and new friends. Terry, it's so nice to meet you, and Maria, who I've admired for so long. It's just nice to be with this group. You know, when a film like Everything Everywhere All at Once does so well and it resonates so deeply with the culture, I think we have to look at what is happening that such a broad spectrum of people have rallied around such an unusual story. And as I've thought about it, there are 2 reasons that I see that this film seems to be right in the center of the zeitgeist of where culture is happening. And I love that word zeitgeist. You know, it literally refers to the ghost of the time, and what is the ghost that is haunting us in this moment. Well, in its simplest form, and my reaction to the film was quite different. I was taken from the first frame. I've followed the Daniels work for a long time, and am really intrigued with them as storytellers. But you know, in its simplest form, this is a film about a character who's trying to save existence. That's the goal, is she's trying to save existence. And we see that being a powerful theme right now, because there are a lot of people, whether consciously or unconsciously on the planet right now, worried about the future of our existence. So I don't think it's a mistake that we see a film celebrated this year that is about someone saving existence. What's more mythological than that, to imagine that someone out there could save us from this rat's nest that we seem to be trapped in. So that's I believe the first reason that people resonated so deeply is the thought of someone being able to save existence is a pretty powerful idea to connect to right now. The second reason that I think people have resonated so deeply with this story is that it's accomplished through this character connecting with the lives she could have had. And I think we live in a world right now that possibilities and options seem endless. We have more opportunities and choices than we've ever had in the history of the human experience. We all suffer from some degree of FOMO and this fear of missing out. And it stuns us. It causes us to not be able to make decisions at all. We're frozen, suspended in time. Our development is arrested because we imagine the choices we could have made and the lives that we could have had. And as technology continues to propel us forward, as AI becomes such a topic of conversation in our popular culture, I believe that this fear of the lives that we could have had is haunting us as part of the ghost of the age. I think it's another reason why there's been such an interest the last few years in space travel and people like Elon Musk wanting to go to Mars. In our mythological development, if we believe that mythological development mirrors the physical maturity and development of the human being, what happens when we come of a certain age? We want to separate from our mother. And perhaps we're at an age right now that the human experience is interested in entering an adolescence that we separate from Mother Earth and we go to Mars, or we go to space, or we go to these other areas. I think there's something happening mythologically causing us to enter an adolescence that everything, everywhere, all at once is a harbinger for. It is a prophetic voice speaking to this concern about the future of our existence and about our deep fear about the lives that we may or may not be able to lead in the future. I'm really struck with this film because of the philosophical questions I think it's posing in our moment in time. And I'm super excited to hear what other people, how other people are responding to those questions as well.
Thanks, John. Please come on in, Corinne.
Oh, yeah. And I'm going to say, John, that was brilliantly said. And I just want to piggyback on that a little bit. And then I have another thought. But it's interesting because I have teenagers. Wish me well. Anyways, I have two teenagers and they both were blown away by this film. They said it was life-changing. My youngest even said, Mom, it helped me with my existential crisis. I'm like, you're 15. How do you have an existential crisis? But apparently they do. So she said, you're really right. It's touching on something. And of course, films don't win awards or sweep awards unless they're touching on something. So John, I really want to say that's very profound. The one thing I wanted to add, I looked through the Academy Awards a little bit of a bigger lens, that I noticed how many mythic filmmakers were nominated. And when I say that, I mean filmmakers that base their work on myth. Very exciting if you look through that lens. I'll just rattle off a few and then I'm going to tee you up, Will, to riff. But basically, James Cameron, I just watched him do a 2-hour talk. I'll spare you the whole 2 hours and tell you that in 5 minutes, he said basically that his work is all myth-based and that Avatar is a mythological project. Hindu mythology is in there, Native American mythology. So once again, these filmmakers that are really mythologically impacted or influenced their works. The other one who I adore is Baz Luhrmann. How mythic is Elvis? I mean, can you get any more mythic than Elvis, quite frankly? And if you look at his body of work, The Great Gatsby is mythic. He even says Moulin Rouge. Every interview you read about him, he says Moulin Rouge was based on the underworld and the myth of Orpheus, so you couldn't have a more mythic-based filmmaker. So, and Steven Spielberg. So I was looking at all these filmmakers. What did a lot of them have in common? They're influenced by myth. They're influenced by fairy tales. They're poster children for what we're all talking about here.
Just while you're saying it, Del Toro and Darren
I'm leaving
Aronofsky.
with my best example. You jumped the shark. You're ahead of your skis. So I'm going to leave with my best example and cue you up for Pinocchio. So I have done
more research on Guillermo del Toro. I've been to exhibit 4 times, his exhibit on myth and monsters and movies at LACMA. He has a house. He bought a house that's bigger than most people's house that he's dedicated to myth and monsters. The entire house he calls a laboratory for myth, on research on myth and fairy tales and monsters. The entire house is dedicated to that. But, you know, Guillermo del Toro, Pan's Labyrinth is mythic. Every work he's done has been myth influenced, and Shape of Water, mythic beasts, mythic creatures. So that kind of cues us up for the end of my thesis here, which is that how many of these filmmakers are myth-based, myth-influenced, and Pinocchio. And Guillermo del Toro, if you research on him, he will say over and over again that fairy tales and monsters are the biggest influence in his life. And the last thing I'll say, and I told Dennis this earlier, is there's somebody who wrote a fantastic thesis, I thought, at Pacifica called, I might be saying it wrong, but I think it's The Fantastical Dark Guillermo del Toro, and brilliant, amazing Dennis, surprise, surprise, was his thesis advisor. And so once again, I'm going to send it back to you because we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about Pinocchio, and probably the most mythic filmmaker of our time.
Well,
I'll get off my soapbox.
Well, I think, first of all, will somebody watching this forward this to somebody to get this group invited to Del Toro's house? Because we would love to do that.
Field trip. Wait, I have an idea. Field trip. We're going to his house. It's in Woodland Hills. It's right next door to his real house, but it's bigger than his real house. Okay, anyways, field trip. It's a field trip.
Sounds awesome. And, you know, I do want to talk about Pinocchio. Pinocchio is one of my favorites. Prometheus is literally mixed into most of my passwords. So I'm looking forward to coming back to Pinocchio. There are a few things I want to say about the heroine before we get totally off of it. And some things I want to recap from what I've heard here. And we'll shift into a little bit of a new conversation. And that's, first of all, I was invited to go see this film by a friend who did the meat suit for Lady Gaga. And I went in and we just got obsessed with the freaking hot dog hand. So we can't forget how just amazing some of the visual elements and the creativity of that film did a lot. But I also want to say that I'm a person who drinks from a fire hose, and I freaking loved it. You know, you go in and you watch my brother play video games, and he's got 17 different sources of information at all times. So there is maybe something generational about, I felt met by that much energy. I felt engaged by that much pace. I wanted it. I liked it. The other thing I wanted to say, really get into, it has to do with that, is this adolescence thing that John's saying is really interesting to me. And what I'm looking at is not just the adolescent male, masculine, leaving the mother, but the mother when this happens. And the mother, when this happens, we think of the story of Demeter when Persephone finally leaves. She has to find a new life. And so I'm really interested in what nerve this movie has touched about the evolution of the mother, which means in Latin is mater, means both mother and matter. And we see this archetypal character in its evolution in the form of figures like Jean Grey, the Dark Phoenix. And we also see it in the Eternals, the main character in the Eternals. These are these women who are flipping the script on what the mater is supposed to be. Mater is supposed to be dead matter that does as it's told by pater, which means pattern and father, right? Mater has been this repressed feminine experience for a long, long time. And so what we end up having is, yes, we start out with an arc of this woman who's totally been turned into dead matter, dead mater, with no imagination. She's stuck. She's in a system. But this is what we've done to mater. This is what we've done to our world. This is the zombification and the routinification of a dead material universe, which they deal with in that film when they're looking at the dead rocks and the existential crisis that leads us into, this isolation. But the mother that we see in this film, it's also, as mentioned, a generational story. This is the story of a new feminine, and her daughter is not mater. Her daughter is a new thing. She is what matter really is to us now. We used to actually truly believe matter was dead, inert stuff. And there are a lot of people that are still in that hangover. However, since the discovery of quantum mechanics, we understand that things can be anywhere, everywhere, all at once. We understand that matter can be whatever something turns it into. So what we're looking at is a new personification of mater that is a complete arc away from what Eve was. And it's been delivered to us, like Jean Grey, the Dark Phoenix, and like the character in the Eternals, who literally has ultimate liberated relationship with mater. And so that's what I saw when it came to the feminine in that story. And I found it to be incredibly meaningful and profound and inspiring to me. And by the way, it's a topic that Maria helped me get into in this thick, heavy doorstopper of a dissertation many lifetime ago. Thank you for indulging my interest in that. I really want to turn our conversation to another thing. That movie did another thing that was really unique and really different. The model that's been going around for a long time has been very linear. We're here with Chris Vogler, who's the biggest voice out there on the hero's journey. He's inspired so many filmmakers, including some of these Oscar winners. But what's so profound is that this movie was itself not linear in time. So my question, and I'd like to start with Chris, is what do we make of Hollywood, which has been all about the hero's journey, as you know, championing a non-linear story? And it might be a trick question, maybe, maybe not, but I would love to know your thoughts. Was it a hero's journey, or did they totally throw it out the door?
Well, I have to answer that two ways. That I think can be deconstructed, just as we did decades ago with Pulp Fiction, which was the monument of its time for telling stories in an unconventional way. And there also you can read a film different ways, and there is a kind of a linear sequence to Everything Everywhere All at Once of the state of chaos, not knowing, getting some inkling that there's another universe of possibilities, learning all the ropes of that, meeting different obstacles, being transformed by them, learning lessons, making allies. All of those things do occur in a more or less linear sequence. But at the same time, the movie is unstitched in other ways, in the way that you have access to all these different, both other lives, other possibilities. I like what John had to say about that, about the FOMO of, wishing that you could express all these other possibilities. And I think of them myself as sort of sub-personalities that we all have, that we entertain. What if I had continued on a certain path, or if I hadn't made that mistake, or if I had made a different choice? So the movie was nonlinear in that sense, and also could dip in any geometry you want into other parts of their lives and other times in their lives. And all of that was, I think, postmodern, in the sense that the postmodern condition is that the mirror of the universe that we see ourselves in, it has been shattered, and it's in an ongoing big bang of exploding shards. And I think young people, and you are right, Will, I think to point out there may be a generational barrier here, or a difference in perception. But the young people have they've been accustomed to accepting things coming at them in a chopped up, unstructured way, and enjoy that in a way that for my generation may be a little bit unsettling. So I think we kind of get it both ways with this film, that you do have a linear sequence of developments, story developments. And I think also it would be very interesting to subject this one to some analysis by geometry. That I think this is a general thought I've had about the difference between the masculine so-called way of telling stories in generally a linear way, or the more feminine approach, which is to tell in cycles, or to tell in a more concentric circle geometry than we find in the attitude, the thinking that's behind most male stories that are so aimed at achieving a goal. The feminine model, as I understand it in my limited male way, is about going through these stages that are, laid down in the hero's journey, but doing them in a concentric way where everything, everywhere, all at once has to be considered every time you go across one of those thresholds. You can't go in this, I think, deeply human way unless you are aware that every choice I make is connected to every other choice, and all the relationships I have, and anything I say or do is going to have an impact. What a burden for parents. I mean, that was one of my impressions watching that film, was realizing that the most casual thing you say about your daughter being fat lands like a punch and sticks for life. So these things, I think, get you to a place where it has that feeling of concentricness and of web-like movement. It's a weaving. It's a tapestry. And if you pull on one thread, you're pulling all the other threads. And that's part of the pleasure of it.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I was really looking forward to hearing your thoughts about it. And, the first time I planned to get you and Maria and the head of the Campbell Foundation together, which is now John, was specifically to talk about how the hero's journey is evolving. And I feel like we found our way backwards into that conversation by talking about this film. And I see Dara, who's another person I was really eager to hear your thoughts about it, because you're really one of the masters I know of this linear story. What do you think about it? Are they doing new things?
Well, to say it in that context almost makes it accusatory. So let's approach it a little differently. What I was going to say is, and I really appreciate everything that Chris was just talking about. It's really sort of a both and, because there can be a fine line between making something complex and something confusing. And confusion is not engaging. Okay, confusion pushes you out. Complexity can pull you in. And I think we have to bear that in mind. So when I say both and, I structurally, in all kinds of ways, I could be a little critical of this film, but but then again, what's the point? I think it's working. And I loved Dennis's comment where he said he was exhausted. And I think that when art does that, it kind of, exhaustion means it's all your guards are coming down, and you're more raw in standing before it. So again, you kind of have to see it where it is, and where it is it landed. Okay. And so I always start analysis or evaluation from that point of view. Is it working? Because if it's working, that's what I want to look at, not is it working my way? Okay. So I think that's very interesting. I think there are some blocks up in this film. I have to say, and I have to put this in front of what I say, I love these filmmakers. I thought they were just wonderful. And therefore I wanted, I want to follow them. I want to go where they want to take me. So that's also a part of it. But I remember when Pulp Fiction came out, and again, it was throwing this sort of interweaving and complexity at us, but it was a very trackable film, even with all of that complexity, because I think it was a more matured film. But I don't mean mature like it's a grown-up film. I just mean that it was rendered more. Okay, I feel that this very often when I work on a script, or when writers work on a script, you enter a story with one intention, and by the end the story is giving you something that you hadn't quite anticipated. And that's very exciting because something fresh is happening, but it means then you go back and you say, am I setting you up for where my story is going, kind of thing. Anyway, when Pulp Fiction came out, I was teaching a course and everybody was very interested in why this was working. So I said, I'll actually do a full analysis of it and see what's going on. And what was very interesting to me about the analysis of Pulp Fiction, I did it two ways. I did the analysis in the manner that the story was done. And then I took the whole story apart and put it in a linear pattern, as if it had happened in real linear time. And what was interesting to me, when you laid the two analysis right on top of each other, they completely matched up. In other words, they were hitting all of the structural elements and everything. The only thing that was far more compelling in the way that Tarantino did the film was thematically, because the way the film was sort of moved around and distorted from the linear, the theme was so much more powerful, the organization of it. And I feel like that's a bit of what got lost in Everything Everywhere All the Time. Because I feel like he did change thematic courses in the middle of the stream, that this story was still guiding him around. And again, had the story been a bit more worked on by the artist, it might have come up a little more trackable. But then again, it is what it is. And so in its form, as I said, it wears us out, it makes us look deeper, and maybe that's its intention. So we have to go with that too.
Yeah,
I just chime in on what Dara said originally about ritual. Rituals are supposed to be boring. That was one of Joseph Campbell's beliefs. They're supposed to wear you out and thereby make you susceptible to a whammy that comes from somewhere unexpected. So something will lull you, perhaps, or overwhelm you, or overwhelm your senses. And out of that, you kind of drift into an altered state of consciousness where you can be affected in the organs of the body, in the chakras, and really feel something in a film. And also, Dara, I think you're onto something with the idea that there's kind of an appetite for complexity, and for longer story forms. People have an appetite, apparently, for longer movies. Certainly the filmmakers do have the ambition to want to take up, so much of our time. It's a nervy thing to be a filmmaker, even of a short film, because you're demanding that people look at you and only you for this much time. And that's a big ask in today's world, where we have lots of things competing for our attention. But the appetite is there, and I think it helps explain some films like Christopher Nolan's work in the past with Inception and other films that are complex, almost as if complexity were a character or a very important thematic element, that this thing satisfies a certain part of the audience that is ready for that kind of more complex intellectual exercise, or for that much stimulation. I think we should make the adjustment to that. Those of us who are still living in the world of 90-minute movies and simple stories for simple people. There's, as I said, a reward for hanging in there and submitting to the ritual.
John, you're about to jump in. I hope you will.
Yeah. There's, I think, another way to, look at some of the structure that was happening, not just in Everything Everywhere All at Once, but as we broaden out to the other Best Picture nominees, if you notice, about a third of the nominees this year were not just stories of a hero's journey or heroine's journey or any sort of gender journey, but were actually stories of a collective journey. And this is something that has really intrigued me, that I've been working on the last year or two, is what does that collective journey look like? Because I think we as a society are needing to be able to articulate, how do we go on a journey together? Yes, we're always going to have the individual ego journey that each of us experiences in our life, but if we're going to push society forward, if humanity is going to make it, we're going to have to figure out some ways to go on a collective journey together. So, you look at the structure of some of these films, and it doesn't quite hold together in the way that we might expect, because we do have collective journeys going on. And I think about Women Talking was also one of my favorite films of the year. And this is really the story of a collective group going on a journey. But in the same way, Avatar was a collective journey, because it's this family. It's not just one character going on a journey now, but this family that's going on a journey. And I think, again, why do these films find their way to the Best Picture nominees? Because they're hitting that zeitgeist of our moment, that we need to know how to go on these journeys together, and we're not quite sure how to do it. And we haven't seen successful templates of that in culture. So we look to art to perhaps provide a guiding light to show us the way.
Awesome. Can't wait for that book. Maria, I see you don't want to jump in. I hope you will.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm so glad you mentioned the family, because in so many of these films, we begin with the hyper-dysfunctional family. It seems to me the hyper-dysfunctional family, larger than life and twice as unnatural. There's a lot of toxicity in there. And I can't help then but think of myth and fairy. I mean, where do you find the hyper-dysfunctional family but in Greek myth or myths from all over the world? And in fairy tales, you have terrible family situations to start with. And so one of the things that I think is really great, and someone mentioned this, that directors are no longer embarrassed by their source material. They're happy to acknowledge their roots in fairy tale. And Guillermo del Toro talks in one of the director's cuts of, I think it's the director's cut for Pan's Labyrinth. He talks about the influence of fantasy, fairy tales, fiction. He's a voracious reader and viewer. So I think I think myth and fairy tale have always been lurking in the background, but often unacknowledged. And part of this, I think, has to do with the understanding that make-believe has to do with the making of beliefs. This is women's imagination speaking. And what happens when when we go to the movies, and in these movies this year, we got a lot of talk. After all, movies are the talkies. They're also motion pictures, but these are long movies. They're discursive. People are talking, but then we leave the movie and we end up talking about what went on, not just what went on in the movie, trying to clarify our ideas about it, but also about our values and about what the meaning of what we saw on screen and how it applies to our own lives. And again, this idea of using the symbolic to navigate the real. That's the only way that we are going to be able to manage to live together, it seems to me. And I kind of like the fact that many of these movies are really long and thoughtful, and they're challenging. And you finish them and you say, hey, what happened? I didn't really, maybe I didn't care for this so much, but then I'm somebody who always watches things twice, because the second time I start to appreciate what went. And I don't think I always appreciate what I see on screen the first time, but the second time, suddenly I'm able to put things together.
I'd like to jump in with a comment about power and agency. And I was struck in the Triangle of Sadness, how after they go through the shipwreck, which is a sort of being washed up on the shore, and all of the previous power structures that existed in the real world are abandoned. And there's an attempt by the woman captain to kind of like keep people in order and keep the structure. But the power is held by the woman who was the cleaning lady on the ship. She knows how to fish. She knows how to provide resources. She knows how to keep the people together. And so there's this shift of agency where people become dependent upon her. And she does this little scene where she gets people to say, okay, where's the power? Here's your fish. Where's the power? She gives people fish. And I was struck by, even in Everything, Everywhere, All at Once, without agency, we are dependent upon those who administer power over us. Mm-hmm. And the disappearing with the button is the thing that she can go in and she can flow with the situation. There's so much agency being described in these various movies that and again, going back to the Triangle of Sadness, talking about vomiting, if you've never seen it, this is straight out of Charlie Chaplin. I mean, this whole scene with the vomit just going all over the ship as everybody is getting seasick. And it is done to comic proportions.
Thank you, Dane. It's good to hear from you. I wanted to come back to what Maria was saying and kind of come back to the nonlinearity theme. And I hope that this is considered part of nonlinearity. I see movies, as we probably all do, as psychodiagnostic, that where people land, they're projective tests, and where people land, who they react to, who they hate, who they love, who they bond with, gives us a very immediate information about where our psyche is, what we're working on, how the shadow material is operating. And for me, my favorite movies to teach this year were the movies with ambiguous endings. Nope, Eternal Daughter, Banshees, Tar, Corsage, my favorite movie of the year, Decision to Leave. I love that opens up a conversation with the people I'm teaching and to see where they are, how they respond. And I've had to grow my ego strength as a teacher over the years to be able to tolerate all kinds of disagreement, which has been really good for my arc, to teach. Others who teach know this. So I just wanted to throw that into the conversation. And sometimes that's how we discover as a group whether it is confusion or complexity, is how many people don't get it, don't want to get it, have no interest in, they're just irritated as hell that there's this ambiguous ending to try to reflect on, but it invites reflection. And then what I love is when the conversation, like we're doing here today, the conversation brings things to the surface, brings things to consciousness, and people go away with a better understanding of where they land or what it means to them. So I wanted to throw that into the mix because the ambiguity to me is another form of holding paradox. Can we tolerate the paradoxical qualities in this ending? And can we hold them together in conversation and see where that takes us? So to me, that's one aspect of nonlinearity that I've really been tuned into this year.
Well, I want to bring up part of how that relates to the Daniels specifically that I think is super interesting. To your point about the story continuing after the story's over, that's really common in documentaries, for example, where you're not going to get to the happy ending. The rest of the story must happen in the real world. The documentary does stop before the story is over, and the storyteller has to understand this. But what the Daniels have done that is so profound, going back to their earliest stuff before, honestly, Dara, I don't know if you remember this, but they were once in conversation with our friend John Rotz, because the first film that they didn't get a chance to make was for Jim Carrey. And this was their problem, was they had not figured out story structure enough to take on a project like that. They were music video filmmakers, and they had won some awards for the British Music Video Awards. And I had gotten to be friends with them. And these are some playful dudes. I remember Daniel Kwan in a suit 10 times his body size, playful guy. And so what we have to recognize is that in these music videos, they would keep showing themselves making the video in the video. They wanted to take you off screen. They wanted you out of their structure before they even knew a structure was what they were people that wanted to go outside of the confines, literally show you things going wrong on set in the middle of their music video. I got to go to a thing with them where there were like 20 of us with they did a camp for kids and music videos. So what I want to point out is just a deeply playful nature that is resistant to being overly structured. And I feel like it was at a time, if we remember, we were all about to snap. We were all a lot closer to snapping when this movie came out. And so to see something that held something so lightly in its hand with no grip, just playfully offering it to us and letting us have fun with it, I loved that part of it. And I just wanted to share that I think that the playfulness, the ability to go beyond the structure while also loving the structure is part of what made it work for me.
Because thank you, younger person in our crowd, for reframing this for us. And I so do appreciate that the millennial filmmakers like the Daniels are mashing up genres. They're playing with form. They're throwing too much at the screen, and they're having so much fun. And no wonder they're so widely beloved. And that's in addition to, then we had 4 acting awards this year for people over 50. So there's this wonderful paradox there that they're honoring the 2 women, the 2 leads in their film. And so anyway, yeah, I could go on about this, but thank you for being the person in our audience that's really in our panel here that really gets it from a whole different level than we possibly can.
Yeah, that's wonderful, Terry. 2 things I'd like to bring up. What about our dream life? Because so many of these films have a dream quality to them. And what is our place as participants with our dream life? And one thing I'm paying attention to, having been watching as many of these as I can, what are the subject matters of my dreaming? And I dream of a couple of these films regularly. So I think our own unconscious is scripting another level or layer or many layers of these films. That's one. I want to sidestep for just a moment because I just discovered Kaleidoscope on Netflix. And I don't know if you've tapped it yet. Giancarlo Esposito is the main figure. This is a story in 8 parts about planning and pulling off a $7 billion heist in New York City. Now, here's the interesting thing about it, which fits into this whole conversation. When you tap into it, you are randomly assigned one of 7 parts in a different color. The color white is the conclusion, so it's off base. But you are randomly assigned a color which puts you into the narrative at a particular point. Let me give you 2 examples. The first time, what came up was yellow. And so we tapped on it, and it said 6 years before the heist. And so you're watching that segment 6 years before they finally pull it off. And then we watched the second one, and we were given the color green. Now we're 7 years out before the heist. It's just a remarkable extension of what we've been talking about, that in some ways, once you enter that piece, it makes sense. So it's telling us something really interesting, I think, about how myths can shatter that linearity and still create an understandable and entertaining and profound sense, both in structure and in content. So kaleidoscope, I just wanted to put that out as another example of what we've been talking about.
I wanted to give a shout out to international films this year that also were very mythic. I don't know, RRR was based on the Hindu mythology, and some people think it was based on the myth of Gilgamesh, but it just took the world by storm. Also, Terry spoke to it earlier, Decision to Leave. Oh my gosh, that I'm just shocked that it didn't get nominated. I'm still shocked that didn't get nominated, but it was definitely an international film that dealt with the mythic. And I think, Terry, you'd have an entire class based on that. And I also want to give a shout out to the genre I work in, which is documentaries. I worked on 2 films that were nominated for an Academy Award this year in the documentary world. And people don't think of documentaries as mythic, but they're very mythic. And a lot of the filmmakers I work with says myth infuses their work. And 2 this year that really stood out were the one that won, Navalny, which I didn't work on, of course, but that, how mythic of a character is he? I also worked on a gem of a film, an Indian film called All That Breathes, about 2 brothers who heal these birds in India. And it sounds like such a small little story, but it's this beautiful mythic story about healing animals and how it relates to climate change. So anyways, I just want to kind of say there's international, there's documentaries. And Dennis, I'll share this later just to kind of dovetail on what you were saying. A few years ago, the Academy Museum did an exhibit. It was one of the most brilliant exhibits I've ever seen on Fellini and his dreams. I don't know if you saw this exhibit, but it was an entire exhibit on how dreams impacted Fellini's film work. It's one of the most fascinating things I've ever seen. I told Steve Eisenstadt I went 3 times, and his quotes about dream and filmmaking and just, that's a whole nother topic, Dana. And well, we could do a whole night on dreams and filmmaking.
Because I just want to comment actually on what you both just said regarding dreams and filmmaking. And, I think that it sounds like fun that we're going to have a panel on cinema and the movies and all of that. But, if you think about it, what storytelling really is, and now it's done on such a worldwide scale, it's the collective dream. And there is so much going on in our storytelling today that every single one of us have touched on that is telling us who we are, reflecting on where we are and where we are, want to project ourselves toward, and what we are trying to heal. And all of that, just the theme of vomiting, that when there's no accident that these things are coming up and they're circulating, because they are in the zeitgeist. And I'd love to see this group do more work with the storytelling that's going on in the world today, because I think it's so relevant for us to really hear and understand each other. And I'm so glad that Corinne brought up the international movies. I mean, the world is flat these days, and we really need to hear each other's voices to see that, first and foremost, there's only one story to tell that we comprehend, and that's the human story. And what is the human story that is moving around us and that is moving us? And, if not mythologists, then who? I mean, we are the ones who are really investigating these archetypal patterns that we see that are blatantly showing themselves. And I agree with what several people have said. I think John brought this up too, that even the chaos itself of the the storytelling of it is something to pay attention to. All of it are things that are drawing our attention. And if someone is hurting and there is no one to hear it, the hurt just goes on. And so this is why I think us paying attention to our story and paying attention to the narrative that is circulating globally, at least says someone's listening, someone's paying attention. And we are seeing the patterns, we're seeing all of the connective tissue between us. So I just wanted to add that I hope you do more of this. I hope it isn't just relegated to the Academy Awards, because there's so much going on there. We could do one whole thing just on documentaries, just on short films, and I'd love a way, if there is a way to share it, to share the experience with those who are participating in terms of watching a film. I don't know how that could be done, or just make it possible for a week and then we open it. But
I've got a movie coming out. It'll be premiering in the beginning of May that John's in as well. We'll send out an invitation.
All right.
It's all about John Ford movies. But I want to punctuate your main point, your revolution. And that is as we go on. And that's just that because it's the point of the whole evening. And it's that, look, I learn a lot from film studies scholars. I learn a lot from people that there are a lot of people out there that can do a lot with films. But the training of a mythologist, mythological training to interpret the collective dream is unparalleled. And I appreciate you saying it. You've always been one of the people that's been saying it. And we're here with a group of people that want to say it. And I hope this will be shared with people who understand it and know it, because it is true. Mythologists do have a training to interpret dreams. We're all trained in depth psychology and dream interpretation, but then we turned it to myths. And now we turned it to films. We do have something to say, and we do have eyes to see. And I just want to punctuate what you said. Well, and then I think it was Maria and then Chris.
One sentence, Maria, I promise. I don't want to focus so much on interpreting, but being able to receive it and to acknowledge it, to relate to it. Those are the elements that I believe are the most connecting and the most healing, in that we really can be present for the story. There's
John Williams said, before Joseph Campbell told us what Star Wars meant, we all thought it was just another Sunday afternoon space movie. And that's the point, is that we need to take as much out of these stories as we put in. And that's something that we can help with.
Yeah. Thank you.
I keep changing what I want to say, because I've heard so many interesting things, but I wanted initially to talk about Tar and dreams, because that's a film that perplexed me. And on a second viewing, I realized, oh my God, she's hallucinating the final sequence. But let's leave that there for a moment, because what Dara was saying reminded me of how we haven't talked about All Quiet on the Western Front. And war, death, mortality, the whole question of, mortality and art, which comes up in so many of these films. But what I wanted to do was read the epigraph to Remarque's novel, All Quiet on the Western Front, where he writes, "The book is neither an accusation nor a confession, and least of all an adventure. For death is not an adventure to those who stand face to face with it." And I mean, if you saw that film, that you were, how can I put it, tortured really for 2 hours. It's just a brutal experience to see this. And that's exactly what the filmmaker wants you to feel exactly what this is all about. And then today I finally watched Pinocchio, and I'm a huge fan of Guillermo del Toro, but it took me why was I so resistant to watching it? I'm not sure. But you have the reenactment of war, the boys playing war games with paintball and that. And actually that struck me as a statement that was as powerful. You see the absurdity of it. And it seemed to me just a powerful anti-war statement. So, again, the fact that the movies they confront us with our mortality, and they tell us, there is no redemption sometimes. You see the corpse at the end of All Quiet on the Western Front, or they tell us there is actually, there is something in the family, in art, and there is some kind of salvation there. So I'd love to talk about some of the other films in that did not win Best Picture, but might have, could have, should have.
Let's stay on this war theme for a moment, because it is something I hope we talk about, because this is a year that we have seen a war of aggression that has never happened in my whole lifetime, never happened in a whole Cold War. This is a whole new deal. And we, within days, were setting up an event with one of the parliamentarians of Ukraine. And it's very, very powerful. I do want to hear everyone's thoughts about this. That movie was really stunning. And one of the things that it ties back to that I don't want to miss is that the hero's journey has been used to recruit soldiers. It has. I want you. Call to adventure. It's just a fact. And what you see in that movie is you see a deconstruction of the recruitment hero's journey. You see it fall flat on its face as they're singing the same songs that made them feel all cool and ready to go to war. At the end, it's sung in irony. And you see this person on this journey to become a hero. He does become the super soldier at the end. And we all want to puke when we see it. When he finally does become the super soldier, it's like it. Anyway, I was curious, Chris, if you got a chance to see it and if you saw some of that, because it's the opposite of Top Gun, which is a positive vibe, a positive spin on recruitment in the military in a year that the Air Force announced that they're not hitting their recruitment targets, right? So, what do you make of this, Chris?
Well, I confess I didn't see it yet.
Sorry.
That was bound to happen, but I've seen other iterations of that story, and kind of know the general outlines of what they were attempting to present, and I just put that alongside of the Fabelmans, where Spielberg, through his avatar in that film, is working out the trauma of World War II. And, doing it in a playful way and an entertainment way, and got Indiana Jones out of it. But there is processing going on of a traumatic event in the culture. And this tracks back to some things that Dennis was saying, I think, about dreams and how we process things and how we know ourselves. I mean, that's what I think is going on with myths in the first place, with the journey idea, and with these movies that move us, is that it's a way of self-knowing. It's a way to see ourselves reflected, and that everybody reads every movie as a metaphor for what? For me, for my own life, and if I can't find myself in it, if it's too noisy or too busy or too specific in some way culturally that I can't relate to, then it's not about me, so I don't care. And that I think is a dividing line for a lot of people. Am I able to find myself in the metaphor here? I wanted to throw a little light on a film we haven't talked about too much, which is Triangle of Sadness. Not my favorite film. I thought it had a lot of, it attacked its subject with, I thought, dull instruments. It could have been sharper in its commentary and a little more condensed about how it went about it. But there's a mythological and sort of literary tradition that it's based on. It didn't come out of nowhere. That one, I think it's fairly sure, was influenced by an old story called The Admirable Crichton, which was about a servant who goes on an excursion with a rich group of people, and they're shipwrecked, and he's the only one who knows how to fix everything and keep them alive. And then they go back to society, and he is forced to revert to his old ways and doesn't like that. He rebels against that. So there was this literary background to it, but it has a mythological dimension also that goes back to an archetype of the helpful servants who sometimes aid the main characters in the household in some romantic exploit or something like that, but often are there to turn the tables and to flip the whole system on its head. And I think about a character that I actually made an animated feature about, a character called Till Eulenspiegel. And I was involved in writing the script for a European animated feature about this guy. And he was the class clown of Europe, and that was his job, was to go around making fun of all the institutions and turning everything on its head and holding up a mirror. It was a slightly distorted mirror that would exaggerate your flaws, but that was his job, and it was a very important social function for him to do that. So I think there's an odd connection I found between Triangle of Sadness and Women Talking, because they were both negotiating how to live a new way. Once the old way was shattered or was shown to be hollow, then how are we going to move on to a new way? And I certainly could relate to the character in Women Talking of August, because I have played that role and sat in that chair a number of times where anything I said was out of order and not appropriate. And the best thing I could do was just shut up and take notes. So I was amused by myself there, to see a literary reflection of a discomfort I have felt. But I enjoyed that film in an odd way. I mean, it's a dark film and a heavy subject, serious subject, but I did get a pleasure out of it at the idea of seeing how people could reasonably sit down and work something out, and with flashes of violence and sharp discussions, but generally with this wonderful way of proceeding that I thought was a model. And that's, one of the functions of film is to give us new models of discourse, of having discussions and moving along to the next stage in society. So I was really pleased to see that, and impressed too with the craft of it. I thought it was a very well-made film.
I would like to say something that echoes both something that Dara said and you said, Chris. And Dara, you said that we make comments about the human story, and that a lot of times that what we do is we see these stories through the lens of being human. And the thing that Chris said, which sort of goes along the same lines, that as I see myself in these movies, I have to connect to a character in order to get something out of it. And who speaks for the animals? When I look at Haul Out, who speaks for that walrus that crawls in the door, and hundreds of thousands of these walruses are going to die because of climate change? So I wrote Kenny after seeing that, and I sent him the link to watch this movie. Who speaks for the elephants in the Elephant Whisperers? And we really need to have themes that just don't bat the ball within the four walls of the human experience. The disenfranchised, the marginalized, even within the human experience, needs people to speak on their behalf, which is what Night Ride was. Night Ride really is really a cool movie about a little person who steps up for somebody else, befriends this person. And I'll go back to my opening comments about little. If we're not careful, we're going to end up with large, rounded shapes, big ideas that have no room for little ideas to work their way in. And I think this is where Guillermo del Toro comes at it. He sees in Shape of Water this creature befriending, and he has love, because love is universal. Love is something that if we, in the Elephant Whisperers, they befriend these little elephants and they raise them. I mean, it just, the hero is the elephant. The hero is the walrus. And so I'm struck again by the sense of agency. They can't speak for themselves. This is why people have pets, and we take care of one another, and we live in a world where we have compassion. If we didn't have compassion and it was all warrior mentality and achieve and be the best that you can be, I'm struck by the need for these movies, these small movies, these documentaries, and in a couple of months we're having Louis Schwartzberg on here, who made Fantastic Fungi. He looks at the ground and he sees it alive and sees it move. He brings it alive and he's patient. I can't wait to have him on here.
Dana, I see you, Terry, and I want to bring you in. I want to comment real quick on this because this is something I hope we talk about. I thought Avatar was pretty special, unavoidably special, and it made all the money in the world and all that stuff. So how are we going to ignore it? Sit here and ignore it, And it was nominated. What that movie did is it put us inside of the consciousness of an indigenous individual, and it succeeded. I was in there, I'm not to say I'm there, but I'm saying like I was really invited in to flip to the other side of that perspective. And I think that what was so profound about that is that this is a time in our world where, as we're talking about, we are destroying everything. We are the bad guys in Avatar, all of us, and that movie really got us into the other side at a time where that's absolutely critical. So of course we hope everybody will come back to our conversation we have about these types of topics, but thank you for the movie that made the most money this year actually deciding to focus on that. Is it problematic? Is it colonial to have taken somebody else's story? But whose story was it? Because it's everybody's that's been colonized, and it's Pacific, it's North American, it's the Siberians, it's everywhere. But so there's complications because he's clearly not person who's being colonized, no matter what story we're talking about. So there's a problem, but he got us in that consciousness. I think we do need it, and you're calling for it, and I was impressed.
I saw the first Avatar, didn't see the second one.
Second one does it better, in my opinion, as far as getting you to flip over to see their experience, and we could all use that for sure. Terry, I jumped in ahead of you.
Terry.
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. It's okay. In a way, my moment has passed, but I'm going to ping anyway, because I wanted to ping off you, Chris, about August and just say his moment, because this relates back to the war theme. His moment in that movie, Women Talking, that long soliloquy about how boys can be taught. They are children, they can be taught. It brings tears to my chest right now. Just as so beautifully laid out that he gets to talk about the dangers in the masculine, and then the possibilities. And then I wanted to say back to the recruitment thing is one of my favorite dream movies of all time, Julie Taymor's Across the Universe. And the part in that from I Want You to She's So Heavy. If you haven't seen it, Will, I have to send it to you. It's one of the most profound sequences in cinema history, speaking to this and what a trance it is. But I was also just thinking about James Hillman's The Terrible Love of War, and how watching this film, Maria, watching All Quiet on the Western Front, which I could not bring myself to do. I've seen the original. I watched scenes of it. That in a way, we're doing penance just to watch that film, right? We're putting ourselves through an ordeal. And I wondered if it winning so many awards, I mean, there's social reasons for that, but I also wonder if it's a form of atonement, that we place that, with awards in front of people. But then I couldn't place the attribution, but there's a quote that all war movies are anti-war movies and all war movies are pro-war movies. So I was really noticing this year how many films have battle sequences, Avatar, Wakanda. I mean, it's just part of the deal, right? But how many of those films are also trying to bring in peacemaking, bring in women as leaders that want to just keep voicing the potential for peace. So there's some kind of, we're in a liminal space. The whole world is in a liminal space. And I see this bridging happening in some of these big films where there's a big battle. It wasn't in All Quiet, I'm sure, because that was just a pure war movie. But that there's some kind of bridging that's wanting to happen, some kind of holding a paradox where we bring in the feminine principle with the heroine and the hero together. So I just wanted to throw in a little bit about that and say that my experience when the fires hit my neighborhood in 2017, I understood fully what Hillman was talking about when he's talked about how it's in our human nature to love watching things blow up. It's just, there's just something in our nature, because all around me, there were every couple minutes, propane tanks were exploding, and a huge transformer tower was exploding. And I had to force myself to get in my car and leave because it was so awe-inspiring. It was so numinous. I'd never had a spiritual experience like this. It was so literal. So somehow for me, that's all mixed in with why we love war movies, why we love blow up things. It's just, we need, I don't agree with it, but it's somewhere, it's in there. It's in there. So anyway, I would throw that into the mix.
And
Thanks.
Will,
Corinne, jump in. Yeah.
Yeah, I have to tell you, because I've been doing a lot of research for James Cameron and Avatar and a project I'm working on. I have to just tell you a quote because it ties in directly. James Cameron says, you'll love this. I got the idea for Avatar in my dreams. I have my own private streaming service. It runs every night for free. I love that. That's so basically he's talking about his dreams, right? And so he's probably one of the greatest filmmakers of our times. Your own private streaming service is your dreams every night.
I would love to have access to his streaming service, by the way.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Before we go, I know we only got a few more minutes, and one of the movies we've hardly talked about is The Whale. And The Whale was made by Darren Aronofsky, who did a whole event with us some time ago on the 25th anniversary of Chris Vogler's book. And also Darren is a Harvard graduate. So I was hoping before we go, Chris, can you tell us your thoughts? And maybe Maria, if you have one or two, and before we wrap up?
Well, yes, I actually did a hero's journey analysis on that script, and also did archetype analysis of it. And the archetype analysis was the more fruitful or interesting part of it, because except for the hero, Charlie, whose role was pretty clear, everybody else wears at least two archetypal masks, and they keep shifting. So it was, I think, a good example of something that I believe and put forward, which is the archetypes are not like firmly assigned masks. or costumes that the characters wear, or even sets of characteristics or qualities that they have. They are jobs that characters do at different times for different purposes in the story. So it showed a lot of sophistication that way. And what I mean is that a character might come on as a herald who's bringing the news, or as a mentor who's working to try to get the hero to do something for his own health. But in fact, they might shift and end up, in our judgment, being a shadow character who's fighting against the hero. And an interesting parallel can be found here with Everything Everywhere All at Once, where the whole crux of the story is about this irritated, angered, feminine, youthful energy, and the attempt of the parent to try to reconcile that and soothe it, and send forth a message that says, I don't care how much you hate me, and I don't care how much grief you're going to try and chaos you're going to try and cause. You're not the enemy. You're not a monster. You are part of me, and I love you. And those are really powerful messages and needed medicine right now, because I think we have a lot of, understandably angry feminine energy at inheriting a world that, we obviously have not handled very well. And so naturally people are disturbed by that. And so we need the healing of these films. So that's where I landed with working on The Whale, and I thought he did a great job.
Thank you. Gosh, I would love to see your analysis. And also, I forgot to mention, we're with Dennis, who's probably maybe one of the world's leading scholars on Moby Dick. So really, I've got to ask you, Dennis, who is the whale and who is killing it? What's going on? Really quickly, before we run out of time, what can you tell us about Moby Dick and the whale?
Yeah, tall order. Melville titled it Moby Dick or The Whale. And a couple of comparisons, which I think were just ingenious. In the first chapter, Loomings, Ishmael is laying out the story that he's going to tell. And then he goes to the myth of Narcissus and Echo. And he says, this myth is the key to it all. In other words, here's my reading. He's telling us, read this tale through the myth of Narcissus and Echo. So here's the Whale, the film, where Moby Dick is the through line. So we're to read this exile, Charlie, through the lens of Moby Dick. And what both Ishmael and Charlie are after is community in love to throw off the exilic life that they've been living. And Charlie's treatment of his students is so compassionate, so supportive, that it's for me was the highlight of the film. And then at the end, as it happens in Moby Dick, the white whale breaches and Charlie shows himself to all of his students. So there's just so many nuanced parts where Moby Dick gets remythologized into this exile, pizza-eating man who's yearning, as Chris just pointed out, for the love of his daughter. So those are a couple of comments.
Geez, thanks, Dennis. What a great way to end. And I know I'll hand it over to Dana and just go ahead and give my thanks, and to John, who we had to excuse just in the last couple of minutes. But thank you to everybody for joining. It's like really an honor just to be in this conversation with all of you, and a privilege. Dana, as usual, I hope you'll take us out.
This is a classic case of the oppositions of Kairos and Chronos, because I don't know when I've had 2 hours fly by, where there have been times when we do this and I'm going, we got another half hour to fill. We got another 45 minutes to go. You know, this has been the most pleasurable, interactive. The comments have come through the chat. You're beautiful. Dennis, Dara, Terry, Corinne, Chris, Maria, and John in absence. You know, I'm sorry he had to go a few minutes early. We hit on a really good one because of relevance. This is a relevant time, a relevant topic. The films are really relevant. And what I would like to do is, again, as we open it up, I would just like to have a quiet moment at the end and go off into the rest of our lives with an opportunity to reflect upon how much we bring to each other. We do something for our community, but our community feeds back to us. We are a reflection of one another. And this community that we have created has sustained because of the voices that are alive in it, because of the narratives, the stories, and each of us shares that. Each of us contributes to it. Thank you, everyone. I am deeply grateful for everyone saying yes to my good friend and partner and colleague in this, Will Lynn, Dennis, Dara, Terry, Corinne, Chris, Maria. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart.
Wonderful night. Thank you.
All right.
Anyway, loved you all.
All right.
Good idea.